The horse's hooves struck the dry earth in a steady rhythm, dust rising in golden sheets around him as Russell followed the narrow trail winding through cottonwoods and mesquite. Evening hung heavy, the sky bruised with violet streaks, cicadas droning their mournful hum. He had ridden this path 100 times, each journey meaning nothing, each mile silent. But tonight, something pierced the stillness, a sound raw and thin, carried across the heat of the dying day, a child's cry. He pulled the reins, heart knocking once, twice. At first, he thought it an animal, a calf separated from its mother, but the cry wavered, full of words, desperate and broken. "Mama, please." It scraped against the silence like a rusted blade. Russell swung down from his saddle, boots crunching over brittle grass as he moved toward the sound. In the clearing, the scene halted him. A woman lay crumpled in the dust, face turned to the fading light, her body bruised and beaten until she scarcely seemed alive. Her dress was torn, spattered with blood and dirt, one arm twisted beneath her. Clinging to her side was a girl, no older than 6, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with tears, her small arms wrapped protectively around her mother's broken frame. The child's eyes lifted at his approach, wide and storm-gray, darting with fear. She pressed closer to the woman's ribs, as if shielding her with her own tiny body. "Don't hurt her more," the girl gasped, voice shaking but arms holding tight. "Mama's been beaten 100 times. She never heal." Russell's throat tightened. He had seen cruelty men whipping horses, wives flinching under their husband's shadow, but this sight cut deeper, through the armor he'd worn around his heart for years. Slowly, he knelt, lowering himself to their level, hat brim shading. His face, "Easy," he murmured, voice rough but low. "I'm not here to harm you." The girl studied him, suspicion tightening her little mouth. She shook her head, whispering, "They all said that." He let his hands remain open at his sides. Dust clung to the sweat on his skin, the weight of his gun at his hip, a reminder of what men always carried. But he made no move toward it. His gaze shifted to the woman. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a fragile tremor. A dark bruise spread across her jaw, lips cracked from thirst. Life lingered, faint as the last coal in a cold hearth. He reached the cautious hand toward her wrist. The girl flinched but didn't stop him. His fingers pressed gently, finding a pulse weak but steady. Relief unwound in his chest, though the weight of what it meant pressed heavier. She wasn't gone yet. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. The girl's lower lip quivered. "The settlers. They said Mama owed them. Papa's gone. They beat her and left her here." Her words fell into sobs, small body shaking. Russell felt something stir inside him, old and unwanted, the ache of pity, the heavier ache of responsibility. He wanted to turn his back, to walk away as the world often demanded, but the image of the girl's trembling hands clinging to her mother wouldn't let him. His silence stretched, broken only by his heartbeat and the far-off cry of a hawk settling into the trees. "I can't leave you here," he muttered, more to himself than to them. The child blinked up at him. "You'll take her. You'll be gentle." Her plea carved into him deeper than any demand could. He gave a firm nod. "I'll be gentle every step." With care born of habit and hidden tenderness, he slipped his arms beneath the woman's frail body. She stirred faintly, a whimper escaping her cracked lips, but didn't wake. Russell rose slowly, feeling her weight light, as it was a burden beyond bone and sinew. The girl scrambled after him, clutching his coat as if afraid he'd vanish into smoke. His horse shifted restlessly when he returned, ears twitching. Russell whispered a low command, calming the animal. He eased the woman onto the saddle before him, her head resting against his shoulder. The child climbed up after, squeezing between him and her mother, small fingers gripping the leather reins though she couldn't guide them. The sun dipped lower, bleeding crimson across the horizon, painting their silhouettes in stark relief. Russell tightened his hold, steadying both mother and child. His chest felt heavy, not with their weight, but with the certainty that his life, once defined by silence and solitude, was shifting. The trail stretched darker now, shadows lengthening like fingers across the land. The cicadas had quieted, leaving the sound of hoofbeats and the woman's soft, uneven breath. The girl leaned into his side, silent now, her tears dampening his coat. Russell's eyes swept the horizon. The path home was long, dangers many, yet he knew with startling clarity he would not set them down. Not here, not anywhere. Whatever debts had brought them to this ruin, whatever judgment the world held, he had taken hold of them now. He urged the horse forward, each step measured over uneven ground. Above, stars burned through the fading light, scattered like distant fires. Behind them, the land lay silent, holding echoes of violence and cruelty. Ahead, only uncertainty waited, the weight of tomorrow pressing close. But in this moment, with the girl clutching his coat and the woman breathing faintly against his chest, Russell felt a vow settle into place, steady as the earth beneath them. He would be gentle. He would not let them fall again. The cabin stood at the prairie's far edge, its weathered boards scoured by years of wind and sun. The roofline leaning as if tired of standing alone. Russell dismounted slowly, the horse's breath steaming in the twilight air, and lifted the woman from the saddle. She stirred, a moan slipping past her lips, but her eyes stayed closed. The girl clung to his coat as he carried her mother through the doorway, the dim interior swallowing them whole. Inside, the air smelled of pine, resin and smoke. The hearth lay cold, ashes faintly grey. Dust motes spun in the shaft of fading light slipping through the small window. Russell lowered the woman onto his narrow bed, jaw tightening as he took in her injuries. Dark bruises marred her neck and arms, welts crossed her back where cloth had torn away, and her breathing came shallow, uneven. It wasn't the blood that made him pause. He'd seen plenty in saloons and on cattle drives, but the fragile dignity of a woman stripped to nothing. The girl stood at the bed's edge, fists balled, looking at Russell as if waiting for him to falter, to cast them out as others had. He met her eyes, unblinking, then gathered firewood from the corner. Soon, a spark leapt into flame, shadows jittering across the log walls. Heat crept into the room, softening the chill that had followed them inside. "Fetch me that tin cup," Russell said quietly. The girl obeyed, scampering to the shelf and bringing it back with both hands. He filled it with water from the barrel, then dampened a cloth. With patient care, he wiped the dust and blood from the woman's face. She flinched at the touch, lashes fluttering, but didn't wake. The girl leaned close, whispering, "Her name's Isadora." Her voice wavered, yet carried pride, as if speaking it preserved something no beating could steal. Russell inclined his head. "Isadora," the syllables tasted old and sorrowful, yet gentle. "She rest here tonight." The child's gaze softened for the first time since he'd found her. She climbed onto the chair near the fire, legs dangling, the flames painted, her face in amber, revealing cheeks hollow from hunger, eyes too wise for her years. She clutched a ragged doll, rocking slightly, as if comforting herself. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter from town, not far enough to erase the memory of cruelty. Russell felt it crawl under his skin. He knew the voices that mocked weakness, that pressed boots on throats because they could. In another life, he'd stood near such men, saying nothing. Tonight, he could no longer stomach the silence. When the girl dozed, head nodding forward, Russell stepped outside. The prairie stretched wide, shadows long across the grass, stars trembling into life. Above, he leaned against the porch post, eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, the men who'd done this drank and slept easy, believing themselves untouchable. His jaw tightened, but no word left his lips. The West had its own justice, low, quiet, often cruel. He knew better than to shout against it. Instead, he made his vow in silence, one only the night would hear. No hand would touch that woman again. Back inside, Isadora stirred at last. Her eyes opened slightly, pupils unfocused, lips cracked. She looked at him, confusion clouding her features, then at the room as if waking in a foreign place. Her voice was broken, barely audible. "Why? Why here?" Russell crouched beside the bed. "Because the ground was no place for you." She closed her eyes, as if ashamed. "You shouldn't have brought me. I'm nothing but trouble. Though, come for me for her." Her words faded into breath. Russell laid the cloth gently across her brow. "Rest. The talk can wait." All through the night, he kept the fire alive, feeding it sparingly with logs, listening to her uneven breathing. The girl, Nora, shifted in her chair, murmuring in dreams, once crying out before curling tighter against her doll. Russell sat, watchful, hat tilted low, eyes tracing the shadows that moved with each flame. When morning came, thin light seeped through the cracks in the boards. Isadora had slipped back into unconsciousness, though her color seemed less ashen. Nora woke, stiff and quiet, rubbing her eyes. Russell handed her a tin plate with bread and dried apple, the best he had. She whispered thanks, eating in silence, gaze fixed on her mother. Later, Russell led the horse to water and fed it oats, thoughts restless. Already, the air seemed thick with judgment, though no neighbor had set foot on his land. He could feel it, whispers carried like smoke, curious eyes peering across fences, wondering why he'd taken in the beaten woman and her child. The West had little patience for debt, and less mercy for women left behind by weak men. That evening, he ventured into town for supplies. The saloon door creaked behind him, conversations halting briefly. Men glanced up from tables, women from chairs, eyes narrowing. Russell walked to the counter, bought flour and salt, said nothing. As he turned to leave, a voice carried after him, low, amused, sharp. "Reckon the cowboy's taken in a stray." Laughter rippled. "Careful, Russell, that kind of trouble. Don't wash clean." He didn't turn. His steps stayed even, but inside, something burned slow and steady. By the time he returned, night had fallen. Nora sat awake by the fire, waiting. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for signs of the world beyond. He met her eyes and gave a single nod. She took strength from it, returning to her mother's side. Russell set the supplies down, pulled his chair closer to the bed, and sat. Isadora breathed faintly, face slack with exhaustion, hands open against the quilt. Nora curled up on the floor beside the bed, refusing to sleep apart from her mother. The room held its silence, broken only by the fire's whisper. Yet beneath that quiet attention lingered fragile, unspoken, growing with each hour. Russell felt a coil around him, like a rope. He knew the town wouldn't let them rest long, and as he sat watching over them, he understood his life, once empty of ties, was bound to theirs. When the wind shifted, he thought he heard distant hooves, or perhaps only the restless beat of his own heart, waiting for what was to come. Isidora's strength returned in fragments, like shards of glass gathering into something whole but fragile. By the third day, she rose from the bed, steps faltering. She stood near the window, shawl clutched tight, gazing at the prairie, as if measuring how far she might walk before her body failed. Russell watched from the hearth, mending tack, saying nothing, only lifting his eyes long enough for her to know she wasn't unseen. Nora lingered at her mother's skirts, one hand knotted in the fabric, the other holding her doll. She was quieter now, as if afraid any sound might draw the world down upon them again. When Isidora swayed, Russell rose, steadying her arm. She flinched, then let him guide her to the chair by the fire. Her whisper carried shame. "I shouldn't burden you. You're breathing," he replied, tone even, not meant as comfort but fact. "That's burden enough to prove you belong." The words startled her. She looked away, cheeks burning beneath bruises. Nora's face tilted toward Russell, a flicker of trust sparking in her eyes. When Isidora tried to step into town to find work, Russell walked at her side. The main street buzzed, wagons creaking, men leading cattle, women hanging laundry. Yet the air grew thin as heads turned. Whispers drifted like burrs. "That's her, the debtor's widow, dragged near to death, and still shameless enough to walk here. She ruined the cowboy same as her husband ruined himself." Isidora stiffened. With each word, hands gripping her shawl, eyes fixed on the ground. Russell's shadow lengthened over her, stride calm, each step saying more than any spoken defense. He carried no weapon in hand, yet his presence kept cruelties whispered rather than shouted. At the mercantile, Isidora's voice trembled. "I could scrub floors or so, anything to pay what's owed." The shopkeeper, a narrow man with a thin smile, shook his head. "Debts don't vanish with needle and thread. Folks remember what's unpaid." His eyes flicked to Russell with a half grin. "You'll waste your coin on her." Russell placed flour and beans on the counter, coins stacked beside them, his silence heavier than anger. When they left, Isidora's breath came ragged, shame visible in every stiff line of her posture. On the walk back, she murmured, "They're right. I'm nothing but a mark against anyone who helps me." Russell stopped, turning so she had to look at him. His voice was quiet, carrying steel. "A mark against a man is how he treats the weak. You've carried enough of other men's sins. You won't carry mine." She blinked rapidly, unable to hold his gaze, but the weight in her chest shifted, some poison of shame loosening. At the cabin, Russell began teaching Nora to ride the small pony in the pasture. Her laughter rose, thin and fragile at first, growing steadier as the animal carried her across the yard. Isidora stood in the doorway, hand pressed to her lips, watching her daughter sit taller. A warmth spread through her, one she feared to name, lest it vanish like smoke. That night, as firelight painted the walls gold, Nora crept from her blanket and climbed into Russell's chair. She tucked her knees beneath her chin, doll pressed. Clifton whispered, "Will you always protect Mama?" He studied her small face, flames reflecting in her wide eyes. He gave a slow nod, no flourish, just a silent vow that settled like a stone in deep water. Nora leaned against him, sighing as if the world's weight had lifted from her tiny shoulders. The quiet didn't last. Word reached Russell that riders had come through town, debt collectors claiming Isidora as theirs. They spread their message. Freely she owed, and what was owed would be taken, one way or another. The town listened, some in pity, most in satisfaction. Debt was sin enough. A woman alone carried no shield. One evening, Russell returned from the pasture to find Isidora by the fence, staring at the horizon. Dusk softened her bruises, but her face carried new fear. She spoke without turning. "They'll come. You shouldn't be caught in it. Let me go before it ruins you." He stepped closer, steady as the ground beneath her. "You walk out there, you'll meet them alone. Is that what you want your girl to see?" Her throat tightened. She shook her head, tears catching in her eyes. "I don't want her to see me." Shamed, he lifted his hat slightly, meeting her gaze. "Then let her see you stand, not alone." Her eyes lingered on his face, searching, weary yet drawn. Silence grew thick with unspoken things. Then Nora's voice called from the cabin, breaking the moment. Isidora turned, brushing her cheeks. As night settled, Russell sharpened his knife by the fire, steel whispering against the whetstone. Isidora sat nearby, sewing a tear in Nora's dress, while the child hummed softly. The cabin felt too small for the weight pressing from outside, yet it pulsed with a fragile sense of home, daring the world to strip it away. When the wind shifted, carrying distant hoofbeats, Russell paused, blade glinting. He listened, eyes narrowing, then returned to his task. Isidora noticed the change, her hands stilling. Neither spoke, but both knew what it meant. The horizon was moving closer, with it judgment. The saloon smelled of whiskey and sweat, lantern lights swaying against the smoke-hazed ceiling. Russell stood at the bar, hat shadowing his eyes, hands loose at his sides. He'd come for supplies, but the murmur rippling through the room told him this night wouldn't pass quietly. In the corner, three men leaned close, boots propped on a chair, spurs glinting, debt riders, coats dust-stained, voices sharp with cruelty. One rose, sauntering forward with a grin that carried no warmth. "You're the cowboy who took in the debtor's widow," he drawled, "loud enough for every year. Fine thing to saddle yourself with." Russell drank, setting his glass down with calm precision. "She's not yours." Laughter erupted. Another stood, scar cutting across his cheek. "Everything she is belongs to the debt. That includes her and anyone keeping her owes double." The saloon quieted, conversations dying like candles. All eyes fixed on Russell, waiting to see if he'd fold or fight. He turned, gaze steady. "No one lays hands on her again. Not while I draw breath." His words were low, carrying farther than a shout. The first man sneered. "Brave talk, cowboy, but talk won't cover what she owes." Russell's jaw tightened, face calm. "Debt's a man's weight, not a woman's flesh." The taller man spat on the boards. "You think you can stand against the whole town? Against us?" Russell let silence do the work, heavy as iron. The barkeep wiped the counter, eyes never leaving the standoff. At last, the riders muttered among themselves, and retreated, but not before one hissed near Russell's ear. "This ain't over. She'll be ours again, one way or another." When Russell rode back, the prairie lay silver under the moon, stillness deceptive. Inside, Isidora sat by the fire, needle in hand, thread tangled uselessly. She lifted her eyes when he entered. "You spoke for me. They won't touch you," he said, setting his hat down. Her lips quivered with a bitter half-smile. "They already have. Words stripped me bare. You don't know the weight of it." He crouched beside her, fire casting his face in shadow and gold. "I know this much. You're alive. That makes their grip weaker every day you breathe." She shook her head. "I've been marked. A woman beaten in the street doesn't rise again. People remember shame longer than blood." He studied her, then answered, "Let them remember. Shame belongs to those who swing the fist, not the one who bears it." Her chest hitched, hand pressing to her mouth to keep a sob from breaking free. Nora stirred, mumbling softly, unaware of the battle in the room. Days passed, each heavy. Isidora fetched water, back straight, eyes low. Neighbors whispered, children stared before being tugged away. Russell walked beside her, shadow long and sure, a shield no gossip could pierce. His silence was defiance, refusing to let her shrink into nothing. But the riders didn't vanish. On the fourth evening, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Nora gasped from the doorway, clutching her doll. Isidora froze by the table, hands white-knuckled. Russell stepped outside, dusk falling hard across his face. 3 men waited at the gate, horses restless, breath steaming. The leader leaned forward. We've come for what's ours. Turn back, Russell said, voice calm steel. The man's hand hovered near his holster. She owes nothing. Tension stretched taut as wire. The prairie wind hissed, carrying dust and sweat. Nora's voice broke the silence, high and trembling. Leave my mama alone. Cruel laughter rang. Isidora stumbled forward, pale but fierce, placing herself between the riders and her child. If you want me, look at me. Don't take her innocence to pay what you think is due. Russell stepped beside her, shoulders squared, hand resting, calm at his side, eyes locked on the riders. You've seen what happens when men push too far. Don't test how far I'll go. The night held its breath. The leader studied him, gauging the silence, the steadiness. At last, he spat into the dirt. This ain't the end. We'll have her, or you'll bury her yourself. They wheeled their horses and thundered into the dark. The dust settled slowly. Isidora's knees buckled. She gripped Russell's arm to keep from falling. He steadied her, hand firm, unshaking. Nora ran to her mother, burying her face in her torn dress. Inside, the fire burned low, glow fragile. Isidora held her daughter close, whispering comfort, though her own voice trembled. Russell stood near the door, watching the horizon, muscles taut, knowing the riders would return. Yet something had shifted. Isidora had stood, even in fear. Nora had raised her voice. Russell hadn't moved an inch. For the first time since her world collapsed, Isidora felt a thread of dignity weaving through the ruin. The night's stillness wasn't empty. It carried the echo of a battle unfinished, and the fragile promise that when it came again, they'd face it together. The cabin was quiet, walls breathing with the fire's soft crackle. Outside, the prairie slept under a vast sweep of stars, but inside, the air was thick with unspoken truths. Isidora sat at the table, needle in hand, thread dangling loose, forgotten. Nora slept on the rug, doll clutched tight, her rest a fragile shield against the night's weight. Russell leaned against the doorframe, hat set aside, eyes tracing the firelight, carving gentle lines across Isidora's weary face. She looked up, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Shame hovered at the edge of her voice, a shadow she couldn't escape. At last, she whispered, I've brought you nothing but trouble. He stepped closer, boards creaking beneath his boots, voice low and steady. You've brought me something. I thought I'd lost reason. Her eyes glistened, confusion mingling with fear. How can you say that, after what they've done, after how people see me? Russell knelt beside her chair, his presence filling the space, his rough hand covering hers. He didn't force her to meet his gaze, letting the warmth of his palm speak where words might falter. I've walked this land alone too long. I thought silence was my companion. Then you and that little girl showed me it don't have to be. Isidora's throat tightened. She wanted to believe, yet scars whispered against it. I don't know if I can be whole again. His thumb brushed her hand, slow, deliberate, reverent. You don't have to be whole, Isidora. You just have to be. The words broke something inside her, loosening the iron band around her chest. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of despair, but release. She turned to him, meeting his eyes, finding no judgment, only steady gentleness that held her as firmly as his hands ever could. His voice dropped to a whisper, carrying the weight of vows. I'll be gentle every step, if you'll walk beside me. For a long moment, she could only stare, fire painting his features in gold and shadow. Then, with trembling breath, she nodded, yes. He reached into his coat pocket, drawing out a simple silver band, one he'd carried from his mother's keepsakes, never before offered. He slid it onto her finger with reverence, as if crowning a queen. The metal caught the firelight, gleaming, faint but certain. She pressed her forehead to his, tears wet against his cheek, her whisper a vow of her own. "I'll walk with you." The fire burned low, the night holding its hush around them. Outside, the world remained harsh, unyielding, but within those walls, a covenant was forged. They were no longer three souls clinging to survival. They were bound, engaged, not by spectacle, but by quiet defiance of despair. Sometimes love arrived, not with trumpets or thunder, but on nights like these, in small vows spoken beside dying fires, when two broken hearts chose to heal together. The prairie woke under a sky of ash and iron, clouds heavy with the threat of rain that never came. Dust swirled in eddies across the cabin's yard, catching in the cracks of Russell's boots as he led the pony from the lean-to. The air smelled of sage and dry earth, sharp with the promise of a storm that hung just out of reach. Isidora stood in the doorway, her shawl drawn tight against the morning chill, watching Nora chase a grasshopper through the brittle grass. The girl's laughter, fragile as it was, cut through the silence, a sound both defiant and fleeting. Russell's eyes lingered on them, the silver band on Isidora's finger glinting faintly in the grey light. The vow they'd made last night felt solid, yet brittle, like a blade tempered but untested dot. He turned to the pony, checking its hooves, his hand steady but his mind restless. The rider's threat echoed in his ears, their words like spurs digging into his thoughts. "We'll have her, or you'll bury her yourself." The town's judgment pressed closer, a weight as real as the wind rattling the cabin's loose boards. He'd seen men broken by less, by whispers, by debts, by the unrelenting grind of the frontier. But Isidora's nod last night, her whispered "I'll walk with you," had shifted something in him. It wasn't love, not yet, but a mutual recognition of scars, a shared defiance against a world that demanded they break. Inside, Isidora knelt by Nora, brushing dirt from her daughter's cheek. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if each gesture fought against the ache of her healing body. The bruises on her jaw had faded to a sickly yellow, but her eyes carried a deeper wound, one that flickered with shame when she caught Russell watching. She stood, smoothing her torn dress, and met his gaze briefly before looking away. "I'll fetch water," she said, voice low, as if testing her own resolve. He nodded, handing her the bucket. "I'll walk with you." Her lips tightened, not in refusal but in reluctance, as if his kindness were a debt she couldn't repay. Nora scampered to her side, clutching her doll, her small hand slipping into her mother's. The three of them moved toward the creek, a half-mile from the cabin, the trail cutting through sagebrush and stunted juniper. The wind carried the faint tang of iron, the earth's own blood, and the distant lowing of cattle drifted from a neighboring ranch. Russell's boots crunched in rhythm with Isidora's softer steps, Nora's skips breaking the cadence. No one spoke, but the silence wasn't empty, it held the weight of their new bond, fragile as the frost that lingered in the shadows. At the creek, Isidora knelt, filling the bucket. The water ran clear, cold enough to numb her fingers, and she paused, staring at her reflection in the rippling surface. Her face, gaunt and bruised, seemed foreign, a map of pain she barely recognized. Nora splashed nearby, tossing pebbles, her laughter a fleeting shield against the world's cruelty. Russell stood watch, his shadow falling long across the bank, eyes scanning the horizon. The riders hadn't returned, but their presence lingered, a storm cloud just beyond the hills. "You don't have to stand guard," Isidora said, her voice barely above the creek's murmur. She didn't look at him, her hands busy with the bucket. "I'm not guarding," he replied, tone even. "I'm standing." She glanced up, eyes searching his face for mockery, finding none. His gaze was steady, not soft but unyielding, like the oak that grew lone on the prairie's edge. She set the bucket down, water sloshing, and wiped her hands on her dress. "You think standing changes anything? They'll come. They always do." "Then let them come," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of a man who'd faced worse. "Then threats they'll find me here." Her throat tightened, and she looked away, fingers twisting the silver band on her finger. The gesture was unconscious, but Russell noticed, his chest stirring with something he didn't name. Nora ran to him, holding up a smooth stone she'd found, her eyes bright with a child's fleeting joy. He took it, turning it in his calloused palm, and gave her a nod that made her beam. Isidora watched, her expression softening, the lines of fear easing for a moment. The walk back was slower, the bucket heavy in Isidora's hands. Russell offered to carry it, but she shook her head, her chin lifting with a stubborn pride that made him pause. She was no stranger to burdens, and he saw in her posture the strength that had kept her alive through beatings and loss. He didn't push, letting her carry the weight, just as he carried the weight of his own silence, his own past. Back at the cabin, he set to splitting wood, the axe's rhythm steady against the morning's quiet. Isidora knelt by the hearth, coaxing a fire to life, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. Nora sat cross-legged, braiding grass into a chain, humming softly. The domesticity of it struck Russell, a scene so ordinary yet so foreign to the life he'd led alone, drifting, tethered to nothing but the trail. The silver band on Isidora's finger caught the firelight, a reminder of the vow that bound them, not by passion but by choice, by the shared understanding that survival demanded more than solitude. The day passed in small tasks, mending a fence, feeding the pony, boiling water for coffee. Isidora moved with quiet purpose, her strength returning in fits and starts. She spoke little, but her eyes followed Russell when she thought he wasn't looking, as if measuring the man who'd promised to stand with her. He felt her gaze, heavy as the heat that pressed through the cabin's walls, but he didn't meet it. Words weren't needed yet. Their actions spoke louder, each task a thread weaving them closer. By noon, the sky had darkened, clouds rolling in from the west, their edges jagged like torn cloth. The air grew thick, the scent of rain stronger now, though the ground remained parched. Russell stepped outside, hat tilted against the glare, and scanned the horizon. A rider appeared in the distance, a silhouette against the grey, moving slow but deliberate. His hand rested on his belt, not touching the gun but ready. Isidora joined him at the door, Nora clinging to her skirt, her doll forgotten on the floor. "Who is it?" Isidora's voice was steady, but her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "Don't know yet," Russell said, eyes fixed on the approaching figure. "Stay inside." She didn't move, her jaw set. "I'm not hiding." He glanced at her, a flicker of respect passing through him. "Then stand close." The rider drew nearer, dust trailing behind him. It was Amos, the blacksmith, his broad frame unmistakable even at a distance. Russell relaxed slightly, but his hand stayed near his belt. Amos reined in his horse, his face weathered and grim, eyes flicking to Isidora before settling on Russell. "Trouble's brewing," Amos said, voice low, like gravel underfoot. "Riders were in town last night, talking loud," said the woman's debts-grown interest. "They're coming for her, Russell, soon." Isidora's breath caught, but she didn't flinch. Nora pressed closer, her small hand gripping her mother's dress. Russell's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened, the color of slate before a storm. "They said anything else?" Amos spat into the dirt, said, "You're a fool for taking her in." Said, "You'll pay for it, one way or another." "Let them talk," Russell said, voice steady as iron. "They'll find out what I'm made of." Amos studied him, then nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. "You're a stubborn one, Russell, always were. But the town's watching. They don't take kindly to strays, especially ones with debts." His gaze flicked to Isidora again, softer this time. "No offense meant, ma'am." "None taken," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know what I am to them." Amos tipped his hat, then turned his horse. "Watch your back, Russell. They ain't the forgiving kind." He rode off, dust swirling in his wake, the horizon swallowing him whole. Isidora's shoulders sagged, the weight of Amos's words settling into her bones. She turned back to the cabin, Nora trailing behind, but Russell caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. He followed her inside, closing the door against the rising wind. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. "You heard him," she said, not looking at him, her hands busy with a rag, wiping the table though it was already clean. "They won't stop. Not until they have me." "They won't have you," Russell said, standing by the hearth, his shadow falling across her. "Not while I'm here." She stopped, rag clenched in her fist, and turned to him. Her eyes were fierce, burning through the shame that clung to her. "Why? Why risk everything for us? You don't owe me anything." He stepped closer, boots creaking on the floorboards, his voice low but unyielding. "I don't do this out of debt. I do it because you stood up when they tried to break you. Because that girl of yours looks at you like you're the whole world. I've seen enough of men taking what ain't theirs. I won't let it happen again." Her lips parted, but no words came. She searched his face, as if looking for a lie, finding only the steady truth of a man who'd made his choice. Nora climbed into her mother's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck, and Isidora held her tight, her eyes never leaving Russell's. The moment stretched, heavy with the weight of what they'd promised each other. Fragile yet fierce, the storm broke that afternoon, not with rain but with wind, howling across the prairie, rattling the cabin's shutters. Russell worked outside, securing the lean-to, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat despite the chill. Isidora joined him, carrying a hammer, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. They worked in silence, nailing boards against the winds. Fury, their movements synchronized, a quiet partnership born of necessity. Nora watched from the doorway, her doll swinging by one arm, her eyes bright with curiosity. When the wind died down, they stood together, breathless, dust coating their hands and faces. Isidora wiped her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. Russell reached out, brushing it away with his thumb, his touch light but deliberate. She froze, her breath catching, but didn't pull away. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, the prairie's vastness forgotten. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible over the fading wind. He nodded, stepping back, giving her space. "We're not done yet." The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Russell sharpened his knife by the fire, the whetstone's rhythm steady, a counterpoint to the storm's lingering echo. Isidora mended Nora's dress, her stitches small and precise, her hands steadier now. Nora drew pictures in the dust on the floor, humming a tune that sounded like a hymn but carried no words. The cabin felt like a fortress, fragile but defiant, holding against the world outside. That night, the hoofbeats came again, not the distant thunder of before, but closer, deliberate, a rhythm that set Russell's teeth on edge. He stood, knife still in hand, and moved to the window. Isidora froze, needle poised above the fabric, her eyes wide. Nora stirred, sensing the shift, and crawled to her mother's side. "Stay here," Russell said, voice low, already moving toward the door. "Don't go out there," Isidora whispered, her hand reaching for his arm. Her touch was light, but it stopped him. Her eyes held fear, not for herself but for him. "I'm not running," he said, meeting her gaze. "And neither are you." She swallowed, nodding, and let go. He stepped outside, the night air sharp against his skin, the stars hidden by clouds. 3 riders waited at the gate, their silhouettes stark against the moon's faint glow. The leader, the same scar-faced man from the saloon, leaned forward in his saddle, spurs glinting like teeth. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Cowboy," he said, voice smooth as oil but sharp as a blade. "Hand her over. Debts gotta be paid." Russell stood still, knife at his side, its blade catching the faint light. "She's not property. Turn back." The leader laughed, low and cruel. "You think you can rewrite the rules? She's marked, always will be. You keep her, you're marked too." Isidora appeared in the doorway, Nora clutching her skirt. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "If it's me you want, take me. Leave him and my girl out of it." The leader's eyes flicked to her, narrowing with the predator's interest. "You don't get to make terms, woman. You're nothing but what you owe." Russell stepped forward, placing himself between Isidora and the riders. His voice was calm, deadly. "You've said your piece. Now ride." The air grew taut, the horses shifting restlessly, their breaths steaming in the cold. The leader's hand hovered near his gun, fingers twitching. Russell didn't move, his knife steady, his eyes locked on the man's face. The other riders exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their postures. At last, the leader spat into the dirt. "You're buying yourself a grave, Cowboy." Hers too. He wheeled his horse, the others following, their hoofbeats fading into the night. Russell didn't move until the dust settled, his breath slow and measured. Isidora stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, a silent question in her touch. He turned, meeting her eyes, and saw something new. They're not just fear, but trust, hard-won and fragile. Inside, Nora clung to her mother, trembling. Isidora knelt, whispering comfort, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Russell stood by the fire, knife still in hand, its blade gleaming like a promise. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of what was coming. "You didn't have to do that," Isidora said, her voice soft but firm, as she tucked Nora into a blanket. "I did," he replied, setting the knife down. "You stood for her. I stand for you." She looked at him, the firelight carving lines of strength and sorrow across her face. "And if they come back, then we face them together." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. It wasn't love, not yet, but a bond forged in shared defiance, in the choice to stand when the world demanded they fall. Isidora nodded, her hand resting on the silver band, its weight a reminder of the vow they'd made. Nora slept, her breath even, the doll clutched tight. The fire burned low, its glow a fragile shield against the night. Outside the prairie, stretched silent, its vastness both a refuge and a threat. The riders would return, their claim as unrelenting as the wind. But within the cabin, something stronger was taking root, a connection, built not on fleeting passion but on the slow, steady work of survival, on the quiet courage to face the storm together.